March 17, 1977. A hydrophone array in the North Atlantic picks up something. Not whale song, not a submarine, not seismic activity. Something else. The sound lasted 29 minutes. It exhibited patterns that defied every known category in the acoustic database. When two separate signals appeared simultaneously and began responding to each other across the deep ocean, the operators stopped following protocol. They just listened. The recording still exists, declassified, analyzed by dozens of specialists across multiple fields, examined by the best minds in acoustics, oceanography, and marine biology. Despite decades of analysis, no one can definitively explain what's on that tape. This is one of several such recordings captured during the Cold War. Sounds that were never meant to exist, recorded by equipment designed to track Soviet submarines. Sounds that shouldn't be there, but they are. If you're fascinated by classified Cold War mysteries and strange truths hidden in declassified military archives, this channel uncovers stories that were never meant to reach the public. Consider subscribing. These histories don't tell themselves. The ocean floor holds the secrets. During the height of the Cold War, when every shadow could hide a threat and the world teetered on the edge of nuclear annihilation, the oceans became the ultimate battlefield. Silent, invisible, deadly, American submarines prowled the depths hunting Soviet vessels. Soviet submarines did the same. And between them, anchored to the seafloor in crushing darkness, arrays of hydrophones listened to everything. The stakes were absolute. A single undetected submarine could carry enough nuclear warheads to obliterate entire cities. Early warning meant survival. Detection meant advantage. So the Navy listened. The analysts who worked these stations rarely spoke about certain recordings. /N/and not officially. Official reports used precise, clinical language. But during shift changes in break rooms, during the long isolation of overnight monitoring, they talked. /N/, and they gave the sounds names. /N/, and among the personnel who processed these recordings, certain sounds acquired informal designations, not official classifications, but shorthand terms used in verbal handoffs between shifts or in marginal notes on log sheets. One such recording, captured in March 1968 by a SOSUS array positioned off the coast of Newfoundland, became known among the analysts who heard it as the slow riser. The name described its acoustic behavior, a low-frequency tone that began below the threshold of human hearing and gradually increased in pitch over the span of several minutes, reaching a plateau before descending again into silence. The pattern repeated 3 times during the 7-minute recording. No corresponding seismic activity appeared in geological surveys. No naval exercises operated in that sector at the time. No commercial shipping manifests matched the location and timestamp. What made the recording noteworthy, according to those who analyzed it, was not simply its unidentified nature. Other unexplained sounds had been logged before. What distinguished this one was the precision of its repetition. Each cycle matched the others almost exactly. Same duration, same frequency progression, same interval between occurrences. Similar characteristics appeared in other recordings from that period. A sound captured near the Azores in 1971 exhibited comparable regularity, though its frequency range differed. Another from the Bering Sea in 1973 displayed the same measured intervals but lasted only 90 seconds. Personnel who worked with these recordings sometimes described them as deliberate, not in official reports. Such language would have raised questions about objectivity and procedural compliance. But in quiet conversations in break rooms or during the long overnight shifts when facilities ran on skeleton crews, one retired analyst, interviewed decades later, recalled the impression these sounds created. He compared it to hearing Morse code without knowing the language, a sense of pattern, of intentionality, without comprehension of meaning or origin. Records from multiple SOSA stations began showing similar unidentified signals during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Not frequently, perhaps a dozen cases per year across the entire network. But the incidents shared enough common features to suggest they represented a specific phenomenon rather than random acoustic anomalies. The sound appeared at various depths, from shallow coastal waters to zones exceeding 10,000 feet. They occurred at different times of day, in different seasons, across different ocean basins. Yet they maintained those distinctive characteristics: regularity, measured progression, precise repetition. No formal investigation was launched. The Navy's focus remained on submarine detection. Unidentified signals that posed no obvious threat to national security received minimal attention beyond basic documentation and storage. Unofficial, unsanctioned, but necessary. Because when you spend months listening to the ocean, when you train your entire awareness on distinguishing one sound from another, you develop instincts. You know when something is natural and when it isn't. And these sounds weren't natural. The analysts who first heard these sounds struggled to find adequate descriptors. The limitations of language became apparent. How you describe something that falls outside every known category? So what exactly were they hearing? To understand how observers interpreted these sounds, it helps to examine what they claim to hear in detail. The recordings typically began with silence or normal background ocean noise, the ambient acoustic signature of water movement, distant biological activity, the faint electronic hum of the recording equipment itself. Then the sound would emerge, gradual enough that its exact starting point remained difficult to pinpoint. Analysts described it as a tone. Though that word implies a musical quality, the sound reportedly lacked. It occupied a narrow frequency band, primarily in a range between 20 and 200 hertz, low enough to propagate efficiently through seawater over vast distances, high enough to register clearly on standard hydrophone arrays. What made it distinctive was not the fundamental frequency, but the modulation. The tone didn't maintain a steady pitch. It oscillated, rising and falling in a pattern that some listeners compare to breathing, a slow inhalation and exhalation, though the cycle lasted minutes rather than seconds. Technical analysis revealed additional complexity. Spectrograms showed harmonic structures, overtones and undertones that accompanied the primary frequency. These harmonics shifted independently, creating an effect some analysts likened to chords changing in slow motion, though again, the comparison to music oversimplifies what they reported. The duration varied. Some recordings captured only 2 or 3 minutes of the sound. Others extended beyond 10 minutes. In every case, the sound eventually faded in the same gradual manner it had appeared, diminishing until it merged back into oceanic background noise. Attempts to identify the source followed standard protocols. Analysts compared the recordings against databases of known acoustic signatures. They consulted with marine biologists regarding whale vocalizations, particularly those of blue whales and fin whales, which produce low-frequency calls capable of traveling across ocean basins. They examined seismic data for tectonic activity. They checked military and commercial vessel logs. None of these inquiries produced matches. Whale songs, while superficially similar in frequency range, displayed different structural patterns, irregular intervals, variable durations, seasonal and geographic specificity. The recordings in question showed none of these biological markers. Geological explanations faced similar difficulties. Underwater earthquakes and volcanic activity generate distinctive signatures, sharp transients followed by gradual decay, or sustained rumbling with chaotic frequency distributions. The unknown sounds exhibited neither pattern. Mechanical origins seemed unlikely given the absence of corresponding vessel traffic. Nuclear submarines of the era produced specific acoustic fingerprints: reactor coolant pumps, reduction gear noise, propeller signatures. The recordings contained none of these elements. Some researchers proposed atmospheric explanations. Under certain conditions, low-frequency sound waves generated in the atmosphere can couple into the ocean to the water surface. But this mechanism typically produces brief, transient signals, not the sustained, modulated tones reported in these cases. By the mid-1970s, a small number of oceanographic researchers had begun informal investigations, working with declassified portions of SOSUS data. Their papers, published in specialized journals with limited circulation, offer hypotheses ranging from unknown biological sources to previously undocumented physical oceanographic processes. None gained widespread acceptance. The phenomenon remained cataloged but unexplained, a marginal topic in a field focused on more pressing questions of submarine detection, ocean dynamics, and marine ecosystem research. These weren't the first reports. Long before hydrophones and magnetic tape, fishermen working the North Atlantic reported something they called the ocean's pulse. One account survives in remarkable detail. Before the development of modern hydrophone arrays, mariners working the North Atlantic fishing grounds reported unusual sounds audible through ship hulls. These accounts, passed between generations of fishermen, describe a phenomenon they referred to as the ocean's pulse. One detailed description comes from the logbook of a trawler operating off the Grand Banks in 1911. The captain recorded an incident that occurred during the early morning hours of September 14th. The sea was calm. Visibility extended several miles under a clear sky. The vessel had anchored to wait out a mechanical issue with the winch mechanism. Around 3 o'clock, crew members below deck reported hearing a sound through the hull. The captain went down to investigate. He described it as a deep vibration, felt more than heard, that seemed to originate from beneath the vessel. It pulsed at regular intervals, 4 or 5 seconds of sound, followed by silence, then repeating. The pattern continued for approximately 20 minutes. During that time, the captain noted that small objects in the cabin, tools, cups, a compass on its chain, exhibited slight trembling in synchronization with the pulses. When he placed his hand against the hull planking, he could feel the vibration directly. He ordered the crew to silence and complete stillness. In the quiet, they detected a tonal quality to the sound, low enough that it registered more in their chests than their ears. One crew member compared it to standing near a large church organ when the lowest pipe sounded. The captain's log notes that the sound did not correspond to any known maritime phenomenon. It was not ice calving. They were too far south and the season was wrong. It was not whale activity, which he had encountered many times in those waters and knew how to recognize. It was not another vessel, as visibility remained clear and no lights appeared on the horizon. After the sound ceased, the captain measured the water depth. His sounding line reached 230 fathoms before touching bottom, roughly 1,400 feet. The location placed him over a section of continental slope, where the seafloor dropped away steeply toward deeper Atlantic waters. He made note of the coordinates and continued to the home port without further incident. Later conversations with other captains revealed similar experiences, though most hesitated to discuss them in detail. The subject carried an unspoken weight, a suggestion that too much attention might invite unwanted scrutiny or ridicule. These historical accounts, while anecdotal and impossible to verify through modern means, establish a pattern. Reports of unexplained oceanic sounds existed long before electronic recording equipment made their documentation possible. Whether these earlier descriptions refer to the same phenomenon later captured on SOSUS hydrophones remains uncertain. What they demonstrate is a continuity of observation across different eras and technologies, a suggestion that whatever produces these sounds, if they indeed share a common origin, has been active for at least a century. Consider the conditions: complete isolation from the world above, concrete walls, filtered air, the constant mechanical hum of sensitive equipment, and in your headphones, always the ocean, day after day. week after week, month after month. What does that do to perception? To judgment? To the mind's ability to distinguish real from imagined? But were these sounds actually real? Consider the conditions SOSUS personnel operated under. The environment in which SOSUS personnel operated created conditions particularly conducive to unusual perceptual experiences. These facilities maintained operational security through isolation. Personnel spent months at remote locations with limited external contact. Work shifts often ran 12 hours, focused on repetitive monitoring tasks that demanded sustained attention to audio signals. The acoustic environment itself, constant ocean noise fed through headphones, became the primary sensory input for extended periods. Sleep patterns fractured under demands of rotating shifts. Circadian rhythms disrupted. The combination of isolation, monotony, and irregular rest created a state of heightened suggestibility documented in psychological studies of sensory monitoring stations. Under such conditions, the human brain engages in pattern recognition with particular intensity. Random noise acquires structure. Ambiguous stimuli resolve into familiar forms. Analysts trained to identify specific acoustic signatures could develop a tendency to perceive those signatures even in their absence, a phenomenon known as false positive bias. These factors explain many reported anomalies. Equipment malfunctions, biological sounds encountered outside their normal context, atmospheric effects creating unusual propagation patterns. All could be misinterpreted by personnel operating under cognitive stress. Yet institutional knowledge among long-serving SOSUS personnel suggested careful discrimination between stress-related perceptual errors and genuinely unidentified signals. Experienced analysts understood their own psychological vulnerabilities. They developed verification protocols, comparing observations across multiple hydrophones, requesting second opinions from colleagues, examining recordings at different playback speeds to detect artifacts. When these checks were applied to the recordings later designated as unidentified, the sounds persisted. They appeared on multiple sensors simultaneously, indicating external origin rather than equipment malfunction. They showed up on recordings examined by fresh personnel who had not been exposed to previous cases, eliminating expectation bias. They maintained consistent characteristics across repeated listening sessions conducted under different conditions. The psychological explanation, while valid for many cases, did not account for all observations. It explained why personnel might report unusual sounds. It did not explain why those sounds, when captured on tape and subjected to technical analysis, continue to defy identification. This distinction mattered. The difference between a perceptual artifact and an unexplained physical recording constitutes the gap between a psychological curiosity and a legitimate scientific question. May 9, 1972. SOSUS facility in the North Pacific. Overnight shift beginning at 2,300 hours. A declassified incident report from May 1972 documents one operator's encounter with an unidentified sound at a SOSUS facility in the North Pacific. The operator, whose name was redacted in the released documents, held the rank of Sonar Technician Second Class. His duty log indicates he was monitoring Sector 7, a deep water region approximately 200 miles west of the facility, during the overnight shift that began at 2,300 hours on May 9th. Standard procedure required maintaining audio monitoring through headphones, while simultaneously observing visual displays that tracked frequency distributions and signal intensity. The operator's written report describes normal acoustic conditions for the first 2 hours of the shift. Biological activity consistent with squid populations known to inhabit the area. Distant shipping traffic at bearing 270. Low-frequency ambient noise from wave action against the continental shelf. At 0115 hours, he detected a new signal. His initial notation described it as a tone of uncertain origin, bearing 145, estimated range beyond 50 miles based on signal strength. The frequency fell within the band typically associated with large marine mammals, but the structure differed from catalog whale vocalizations. He switched the signal to speakers so his supervisor, who was working at an adjacent station, could hear it as well. The supervisor's presence is confirmed in the log. He signed the report as a witness to the subsequent events. Both operators listened as the sound developed. The report describes a rising tone that increased in volume over the span of 3 minutes. As it grew louder, they detected modulation patterns, the frequency oscillating in what the primary operator characterized as rhythmic variation, similar to a carrier wave but without transmission characteristics. The supervisor directed him to begin recording immediately, following standard operational procedures. Standard procedure for unidentified signals. The tape system activated, capturing both the sound and their verbal exchanges in the background. As the sound continued, it passed through several distinct phases. An initial rise, reaching a plateau of maximum intensity, then a gradual descent. But instead of fading completely, it stabilized at a lower level and held there. The report notes this holding pattern lasted approximately 4 minutes. During that period, the supervisor left to consult reference materials and check with other stations in the network. His absence was brief, perhaps 5 minutes. When he returned, he confirmed that no other facility was detecting the signal. The bearing and estimated range suggested a source location beyond the detection range of neighboring arrays. The primary operator remained at his station, continuing to monitor. His report describes a growing sense of unease, though he struggled to articulate its source. The sound itself was not threatening. It exhibited no aggressive characteristics, made no sudden changes. Yet he reported feeling that something in the pattern demanded attention in a way normal biological or mechanical sounds did not. At 0143 hours, the sound shifted again. The frequency began to rise, this time more rapidly than during its initial appearance. It climbed to the audible range, reaching pitches where the hydrophone sensitivity started to diminish. Then it stopped, cutting off abruptly rather than fading. The recording continued for another 2 minutes, capturing only normal ocean background noise. At that point, the supervisor instructed the operator to stop the tape and secure the recording according to protocols for unidentified signals. The total duration of the event was 28 minutes from initial detection to final cessation. The tape was labeled, logged, and forwarded to the Regional Analysis Center. The operator returned to routine monitoring. His log contains no further entries of note for that shift. In the remarks section of the incident report, the supervisor noted that the signal defied immediate classification. He recommended cross-referencing with historical data and consulting with oceanographic research institutions. The final disposition, stamped on the report several months later, reads, "Unidentified. Insufficient data for determination. File for reference." The 1972 North Pacific incident wasn't isolated. The 1972 North Pacific recording was not an isolated case. Documentation from other SOSUS facilities describes similar acoustic events across different time periods and geographic locations. An incident from August 1970, recorded at a station monitoring the Atlantic approaches to the Denmark Strait, shows comparable characteristics. The sound began during late afternoon, detected by 3 separate hydrophone arrays positioned at different depths. All 3 sensors registered the signal simultaneously, indicating a source located at sufficient distance that propagation time differences fell below measurable thresholds. The frequency profile matched patterns seen in the North Pacific case, a low-frequency tone with systematic modulation, rising through several distinct phases before fading. Duration was shorter, only 14 minutes, but the structural similarity was documented in comparative analysis performed by Navy acoustic specialists. What made this particular recording noteworthy was the reaction it produced among biological researchers who later studied it. Marine mammal specialists noted that while the fundamental frequency fell within ranges used by whales, the harmonic structure differed significantly from known vocalizations. One researcher described it as organized in a manner inconsistent with biological sound production mechanisms. Another case emerged from the southern Indian Ocean in February 1974. A research vessel equipped with acoustic monitoring equipment, operating under contract with the Navy, detected a sustained low-frequency signal while conducting surveys of the deep water channel south of Australia. The ship's log indicates the sound persisted for approximately 35 minutes. Unlike the previous incidents, this detection occurred in relatively shallow water, only 3,000 feet depth, over a region of complex bathymetry where underwater ridges and valleys created challenging acoustic propagation conditions. Yet the signal maintained clarity throughout the recording, suggesting significant source strength. The vessel's chief scientist, in his summary report, noted that the sound exhibited temporal structure suggesting non-random generation. He proposed several hypotheses, including resonance effects from ocean current interactions with seafloor topography, but acknowledged that none fully explained the observed characteristics. A fourth incident, recorded off the coast of Alaska in November 1973, added an additional element to the pattern. The SOSUS facility there detected not one but two similar sounds, separated by approximately 6 hours. Both followed the now familiar progression of gradual onset, sustained tone with modulation, eventual cessation. Both appeared to originate from the same general bearing, though exact localization proved impossible given the sparse distribution of sensors in that region. The repetition suggested either a recurring natural phenomenon tied to that specific location, or a source capable of producing the sound on multiple occasions. Either interpretation raised questions that available data could not address. When considered collectively, these cases present certain commonalities: geographic distribution spanning multiple ocean basins, temporal distribution across several years, consistent frequency characteristics and modulation patterns, appearance in both deep and relatively shallow water, detection by multiple independent sensor systems. They also share the absence of definitive identification. Each incident generated documentation, technical analysis, and consultation with specialists across relevant fields. None produced conclusive determination of origin. The cumulative effect of these recordings, when examined in sequence, creates an impression that extends beyond individual anomalies. They suggest a phenomenon with consistent characteristics occurring across vast distances and extended time periods. Something present in the ocean environment that existing scientific frameworks have not adequately categorized. Scientists proposed explanations. Scientific investigation of these recordings have produced several plausible explanations, each accounting for portions of the observed characteristics. The biological hypothesis focuses on marine mammals, particularly large baleen whales capable of producing extremely low-frequency calls. Blue whales and fin whales generate sounds that can travel thousands of miles through deep ocean channels. Their vocalizations serve communication purposes across vast distances, coordinating behavior between individuals separated by hundreds of miles. Research conducted in the 1990s and 2000s revealed previously undocumented whale calls, including some with characteristics superficially similar to the unidentified SOSUS recordings. The discovery of new call types decades after the original observations suggests that marine mammal acoustic behavior remains incompletely understood. However, the biological explanation encounters difficulties with specific features of the recordings. The precise regularity of modulation patterns exceeds what is typically observed in biological vocalizations. Whale calls show individual variation, geographic dialects, and contextual flexibility, characteristics largely absent from the unidentified sounds. Additionally, Many incidents occurred in locations where whale populations were well documented and monitored, yet the sounds showed no correlation with known species presence. Geological explanations offer alternative mechanisms. The ocean floor is not static. Tectonic plates shift continuously. Underwater volcanic systems generate acoustic signals through magma movement, gas release, and hydrothermal activity. Ice shelves calving into polar seas produce powerful low-frequency sounds that propagate across ocean basins. One particularly detailed geological hypothesis suggests that certain seafloor features could act as acoustic resonators under specific conditions. Submarine canyons, deep trenches, or underwater ridges might channel ocean currents in ways that generate sustained tones, similar to wind producing sound when passing across the opening of a bottle. This explanation accounts for the sustained nature of the sounds and their low-frequency characteristics. It struggles, however, to explain the modulation patterns and the irregular timing of occurrences. Geological processes tend toward either constant activity or correlation with measurable triggers like tidal forces or seismic events. The unidentified sounds show neither pattern. Atmospheric coupling presents a third category of explanation. Under certain meteorological conditions, infrasound generated in the atmosphere can transfer into the ocean. Severe weather systems, particularly tropical cyclones and large frontal boundaries, produce powerful low-frequency pressure waves. These waves, when they encounter the ocean surface, can propagate through seawater as acoustic energy. Analysis of weather patterns during several of the documented incidents revealed no obvious correlations. Some occurred during calm conditions with no significant atmospheric disturbances within thousands of miles. Others coincided with storm systems, but the acoustic characteristics did not match the chaotic, variable signatures typically associated with weather-generated ocean noise. A more exotic possibility involves ice. Antarctic ice shelves and Arctic ice formations generate complex acoustic signals through mechanical stress, fracturing, and interaction with ocean currents. Some researchers have proposed that certain ice-related sounds might propagate through deep water channels and arrive at distant locations with characteristics modified by the intervening ocean environment. This hypothesis gained some support from recordings made during the 1990s that were definitively traced to ice events. But it faces chronological challenges. Several of the original SOSUS detections occurred during seasons and in locations where ice dynamics would have been minimal. Each explanation, when examined closely, accounts for certain features while leaving others unexplained. This partial adequacy suggests either that multiple different phenomena are being grouped together incorrectly, or that the actual mechanism involves factors not fully captured by current hypotheses. March 17, 1977, North Atlantic SOSUS facility. Morning shift. Among the declassified materials released in the late 1990s, one recording stands apart in the attention it has received from researchers attempting to explain these phenomena. The tape was recorded in March 1977 at a facility in the North Atlantic. The date stamp indicates the morning of March 17th. Weather conditions were unremarkable. Light winds, moderate seas, no significant storm activity within the monitoring sector. The detection began at 0632 hours local time. Initial characteristics matched previous unidentified recordings. Low frequency, gradual onset, modulated tone. The operator on duty initiated standard documentation protocols. Recording equipment activated. Bearing and estimated range logged. Supervisor notified. For the first 8 minutes, the sound followed familiar patterns. Rising frequency with systematic oscillation. Increasing intensity suggesting source approach or strengthening emission. The operator's log notes describe routine monitoring during this phase. At 0640 hours, the sound changed. The frequency, which had been rising steadily, suddenly dropped by approximately 30 hertz. It held at this new level for several seconds, then resumed its upward progression. 2 minutes later, the same thing happened. An abrupt drop, a pause, then continuation. The pattern repeated 6 times over the following 10 minutes. Each interruption occurred at irregular intervals. Each drop in frequency varied in magnitude. The effect, according to later analysis, was suggestive of a control mechanism responding to unmeasured variables. Then, at 0653 hours, a second sound appeared. It manifested at a different frequency from the first, roughly octave higher, with its own modulation pattern. Both sounds continued simultaneously. Spectrographic analysis confirmed there were distinct acoustic events, not harmonics of a single source. The operator's written account describes uncertainty about how to document this development. Standard forms provided fields for single-source identification. The presence of 2 simultaneous unidentified signals had no precedent in his training or experience. He continued recording. Both sounds persisted for another 4 minutes. Then the second sound began to fade, while the first maintained its intensity. The fading process was gradual but faster than the initial onset had been, roughly 90 seconds from full strength to inaudibility. The first sound continued alone for 3 more minutes. Then it too began to fade, disappearing into background noise by 0701 hours. Total duration of the incident was 29 minutes. The recording captured it entirely. When specialists examined the tape at the analysis center, they found no artifacts, no equipment malfunctions, no obvious explanations. The sounds were present in the data exactly as the operator had described. What made this recording particularly significant was the behavior of the 2 sounds in relation to each other. Statistical analysis revealed weak but measurable correlation between their modulation patterns. When one sound increased in frequency, the other showed a tendency to decrease and vice versa. The correlation was not perfect, not constant, but present often enough that random chance seemed insufficient as an explanation. One researcher who studied the tape extensively described it as the acoustic equivalent of watching 2 pendulums that are not mechanically connected but nonetheless influence each other's motion through some unobserved mechanism. The recording has been subjected to every analytical technique developed for underwater acoustic analysis. It has been compared against comprehensive databases of biological, geological, and anthropogenic sounds. It has been examined by specialists in signal processing, oceanography, marine biology, and acoustic physics. No definitive identification has been made. The SOSUS network was largely deactivated during the 1990s. Satellite surveillance advanced. Geopolitical priorities shifted. The underwater listening stations became obsolete. The SOSUS network that captured these recordings was largely deactivated during the 1990s. Advances in satellite surveillance and changes in geopolitical priorities rendered the underwater listening stations less critical to national security. Many facilities were closed. Equipment was removed or repurposed. The vast archives of magnetic tape recordings were either destroyed, lost to degradation, or transferred to research institutions with limited resources for their preservation. Some recordings survived. They exist now in digital formats, copied from deteriorating tape stock before complete loss of fidelity. Researchers still examine them, still propose hypotheses, still search for explanations that account for all observed characteristics. The ocean remains largely unexplored. Recent estimates suggest that more than 80% of the seafloor has never been mapped at high resolution. The deep water regions where many of these sounds originated see minimal human presence. Whatever processes occur there, biological, geological, or otherwise, operate largely beyond observation. Modern acoustic monitoring continues, though for different purposes than the original SOSUS mission. Climate researchers track ice dynamics. Biologists study whale populations. Geologists monitor tectonic activity. These efforts occasionally detect unusual sounds. Some match patterns seen in the historical recordings. Others present new characteristics that add to rather than resolve existing questions. The recordings themselves remain. They can be listened to, analyzed, discussed. They represent documented phenomena. Acoustic events that occurred, were captured by reliable equipment, and persist in analyzable form. What they represent, where they originated, what mechanisms produce them. These questions remain open. Perhaps future research will provide answers. New technology for deep ocean exploration might locate sources. Advances in acoustic analysis might reveal patterns not visible to earlier investigators. Expanded monitoring networks might capture additional examples that illuminate the phenomenon through repetition and comparison. Or perhaps the sounds will remain unidentified, another category of observed but unexplained phenomena, documented carefully but understood incompletely, acknowledged but not resolved. Somewhere in the North Atlantic, in water depth exceeding 2 miles, in darkness that has persisted since before human observation began, processes continue that occasionally send acoustic energy propagating through the ocean. These sounds travel hundreds or thousands of miles. They rise toward the surface. They encounter sensors designed for different purposes, but capable of recording their passage. And they are heard, documented, filed, analyzed, but not identified. Not yet. The sounds continue. The ocean keeps its secrets. We continue listening closely, because somewhere in the darkness, 2 miles down, in waters we've barely begun to explore, something continues, making sound we cannot explain, sound that shouldn't exist, but they do, and that changes everything. The mystery endures, patient and absolute,